Our final talk today is from a key member of the CCL community, Peter Todd. Peter has done a fantastic job in putting together today's conference and is a truly essential part of our team. He has a wealth of experience in lobbying and forming positive relationships with members of parliament, but today he's going to be talking about the safeguard mechanism and the AEMO integrated system plan. Following this, we're going to have our last breakout session for to discuss these topics, but thank you so much, Peter.
Okay, so Marie earlier covered probably our most important supporting asks, but there's two other important supporting asks that I'm covering here. The first is the integrated system plan, which has been mentioned, and also the one that Paul covered briefly, the safeguard mechanism. So just first, I'll quickly cover a quick review on what Matt Keane presented. So Matt is probably kind of one of the strongest, highest profile conservative politicians that is a really strong supporter of climate change. So I was glad to be able to get Matt to input into this conference. So he's focused on reasonably strong targets for New South Wales, decarbonising electricity, renewable energy zones, batteries, pumped hydro, energy efficient buildings, electric vehicles. And if you want to hear a little bit more from Matt, there's a fantastic presentation that there's a link to on the bottom of this presentation, if you get a copy of it, on the Australian Institute's Climate of a Nation conference. So that's well worth following up to get a bit of more information about Matt's all about. So on this slide, you see at the left a graph we've covered a couple of times already through Jordan, and also Paul just had another similar version to this. So the focus here is what's causing these increases, especially the dramatic increases in the last few years. So what I've done is I've split Australia's emissions up into 4 groups just to make it easier to analyse. We've got industrial emissions, we've got electricity emissions, we've got transport emissions, and some other issues. And all this data comes from the regular government reports that came out of the Australia's National Greenhouse Inventory. So when we break that down into trends graphs for those top 3 issues, you see the grey trend at the bottom, which is transport, which is just steadily increasing up year by year. The next one is the blue one, our industrial issues, which is also going up. But in the last few years, it's had quite a reasonably steep rise. And the good news story is electricity, which over the last 10 years has been a bit bumpy, but it's steadily heading down. So to start with, I'll tackle our good news story, the electricity market. So we've got some maps here covering South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, and New South Wales. And on the right side of the slide, we've got Queensland. So this is information that's been put together by the Australian Energy Market Operator. So that's the semi-government organisation that buys all the electricity from our electrical generators and sells it to our electrical distributors. And that organisation, who is the expert on renewables and energy, has put together a fantastic report called the 2020 Integrated System Plan, a very important document for Australia. You see on these maps, there's some green regions. Each one of those is a renewable energy zone that Matt Keane started talking about. And within those zones, you've got yellow dots, which is solar farms. You've got blue dots, which are wind farms. There's around the snowy region, you've got light blue dots, which are pumped hydro. And there's a few green sections, which are battery storage. So the issue with all those renewable energy zones is they're only just options. And we already know that there's lots and lots of investors who would love to put money into all those renewable renewable energy zones and put in wind farms and turbines and batteries, wind turbines and batteries, but currently they can't because the electricity grid can't be connected to those renewable energy zones effectively. So what's required is a massive investment by the Australian government to be able to make all those new renewable energy zones practical. So you can see on the maps here, there's some proposed grids between Tasmania and Victoria to connect us to the battery of the nation. There's some connections between South Australia and New South Wales. And also all through, there's got to be a massive amount of money spent to connect to all these zones. So what it's all about is delivering lower electricity prices. So you can see on the graph at the bottom is the expectation is that Australia will be generating a lot more electricity because the new electricity will be all renewable, wind and solar. And because that energy is so much cheaper than fossil fuel energies, that will power economy growth and new industries for Australia. So just looking at the details of the graph, the top light yellow bars are all our rooftop solar. The darker yellow bars are our solar farms. The green is our wind farms. We've got behind meter storage. The very important section, which is the light blue underneath the red line, is our dispatchable storage, which is either pumped hydro or battery. It doesn't matter what it is. That's the thing that will give reliability to all our renewable energy. Underneath that is our standard hydro. And the last four are all our fossil fuels, the kind of our gas-fired generators, our high-efficiency gas-fired generators, brown coal and black coal. And even this very conservative plan, by 2040 or earlier, there will only be 15% of Australia's electricity delivered by fossil fuels. So this is a major opportunity. And so it's, as I've said, it's not really a plan, it's a huge group of options that the governments can choose from. And we need to take the opportunity from that. So the question now is, when we go talk to our MPs, what are we going to ask them? So we're going to tell them about the integrated system plan being a least cost way to transition from coal-fired generation to renewable energy and storage, and doing that in a way that ensures reliability. It will give Australia an affordable, secure and reliable electrical system. And it is the key thing that will make Australia a renewable energy superpower. So all the modelling and analysis the AEMO's done says that yes, there's a massive amount of investment required, but the net benefit will be $11 billion as well. So it's an investment which will pay off big for Australia. And even more interesting is the modelling that has been done shows that all these gains can be generated without any extra gas-fired generation. So kind of the gas-fueled economic recovery isn't backed up by this report. So when we go to our MP, what are we going to ask them? So we want to ask them something doable and something practical, something that each MP could do. So the suggestion is we ask them to, the MP to write to the Prime Minister, recommending that the government work towards a bipartisan, detailed, long-term implementation plan for the 2020 Integrated System Plan. So just to finish off this, if you say we go to a coalition MP, one of the things they might say is, we're already implementing this plan. So our suggested response is, you are only implementing the first stages of this plan. a longer term plan is required so businesses can make their long-term investment decisions, and it needs to be bipartisan, because if those plans aren't bipartisan, then business will have no confidence in it. So that's really, we want to talk to and emphasise the importance of this integrated system plan so Australia can become a renewable energy superpower. So in going back to the data, CCL always wants to be a kind of science and data driven in our decisions. So electricity is a good news story. Industrial emissions is not so good. So as I said, they've been going up significantly in the last few years. But before we get into that, let's look at what the coalition is spruiking as their solutions. So the thing that they've been talking about recently is their technology investment roadmap. But as Paul was saying, you got things like clean hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and low carbon materials that could support developments in the industrial sectors. But the government is only, as Paul suggested, the government is only supporting the research and development and not on the implementation. So there's some challenges there. So the question is, how can we reduce Australia's industrial greenhouse gas emissions? And my view, it's not the biggest quantity of emissions, but since it's been driving our emissions up, I think it's one of the biggest problems that we really need to tackle. So for the industrial sector, I've already said the technology roadmap won't be really able to help us much up to 2030. And really, Australia internationally is being regarded as a laggard when it comes to the climate. And if we can't make significant reductions in our emissions between now and 2030, we will remain internationally a climate laggard. So as Paul mentioned in the previous presentation, the coalition have their climate solution plan, but it's currently been ineffective and the scope's not big enough to really make the difference that's required. And to make it even worse, the coalition proposing more natural gas usage. All natural gas emissions comes into this industrial sector. So any increase in use of natural gas will be another increase in all these sectors. Okay, so these industrial emissions, the real cause of, as Paul mentioned, of why our industrial emissions have been going up so significantly recently is the LNG, the liquefied natural gas exports that we're sending overseas. The only short-term solution for all these LNG plants around Australia, and there's not that many of them, but they export a massive amount, is the only solution that's really practical in the short term, as Paul mentioned, was carbon capture and storage. And you see over on the right bottom section, carbon capture and storage is capturing the carbon dioxide from your plant. In this case, it'll be the LNG plants, finding a well-sealed aquifer in the geology underneath or within a sensible 100 miles from a plant, and inject all that carbon dioxide into that geology. So we know geology, the Earth stores a massive amount of gas within its geology. So that's when you have a really difficult problem like LNG plant emissions, then carbon capture and storage is a good option. But as you would have picked up, if you're just getting to know about CCL, we are all about pricing carbon schemes. And as Paul mentioned, there is a carbon pricing scheme in place in Australia at the moment called the Safeguard Mechanism. And I'll be covering that in a little bit more detail next. So if you can combine a technology like carbon capture and storage and a carbon pricing system. It's like the windows. The windows get smaller and the LNG plants' emissions will get smaller. Just a very quick look. The graph on the bottom right-hand side shows the massive increase over the last few years in our LNG exports, mostly to Asia. So we have now become very quickly the largest exporter of LNG in the world. So one of the things that makes LNG difficult is not only are you generating emissions from pumping and compressing all these liquids to be able to put it into ships to go overseas, the LNG itself has carbon dioxide within it. And before the plants can compress the natural gas to become liquefied natural gas, they've got to remove that carbon dioxide. So it's not unusual to have 15% or higher of the gas that comes out of the ground is made out of carbon dioxide. And that's one of the major problems within LNG plants. So I'll now touch a little bit about the safeguard mechanism. So the safeguard mechanism is a baseline and credit form of carbon pricing. So that's like a cap and trade system that's being used in Europe. So it's an emission trading scheme. And as Paul said, it is an effective way of applying a price on carbon. It was put in place after Labor's Clean Energy Act, or the Gillard Carbon Scheme was shut down by Tony Abbott. And so they kind of as a token gesture, he put in place this safeguard mechanism. So how it works, it only applies to the top 200 Australian greenhouse gas emitters, basically the worst of the industrial and mining emitters. But it's still 200 of our biggest emitters is a good percentage of our emissions. So if we could have a carbon price applied onto those top 200 plants, then that would make a big difference. So the way that this sort of carbon pricing system works, so a baseline emission level is put on each of these plants, and if they exceed that baseline, then they've got to buy Australian carbon credits. An Australian carbon credit is, or one Australian carbon credit is 1 tonne of carbon. So Australian carbon, so the little graph on the right-hand side here shows that the current price for Australian carbon credits at the moment in the system is $16 a tonne, which is a good starting point. But the table at the top shows that these are all the ACUs, Australian carbon credits, that have been generated by all these schemes to savanna burning, growing trees, all these improvements. But the safeguard mechanism is only kind of operating at a very low level. So the current coalition government is keeping the baseline level above the emission levels. So no business is really being motivated to reduce their emissions. So, and all the government would have to do without any legislation is just tweak up or lower the baseline levels a little bit, and they'll be applying a carbon price to all these top 200 emission businesses. But yeah, so the coalition government hasn't shown any interest in activating the safeguard mechanism. So we would like it applied broadly, but they've showed no interest of doing this. So the next best thing is to find a thin end of the wedge where can we push the coalition government on? And the opportunity is to combine both the safeguard mechanism opportunity and our major problem with natural gas LNG plant emissions. So one of the things that's happened is that kind of the Australian government, in other words, Australian taxpayers have paid $60 million towards a carbon capture and storage at the Gorgon northwest shelf of in Western Australia. The Gorgon LNG plant has now got a carbon capture and storage system working. It's taken a while to get it working, but it's now up and running. So it's a proven opportunity. It's shown to be a viable technology to eliminate emissions from these LNG plants. So the carbon capture and storage is a technology that the coalition support. So there's a lot of people that aren't really fans of carbon capture and storage, but even if it's not the solution we choose, it's one that works, and there's not too many other options with these sort of plants. Yeah, so as I said, the carbon capture and storage system has been working effectively in the Gorgon plant. So the suggestion, we should request the coalition to reduce the safeguard mechanism baseline for all the LNG industry. So there's not that many LNG plants around Australia. So it's not as if you're affecting kind of 1,000 different businesses. It's a very focused thin end of the wedge to get a little bit of carbon pricing going. And if it can support more carbon capture and storage to reduce our emissions, that would be a big gain for Australia. So again, we're going to MPs and we want to request MPs to write to the Prime Minister, recommending that the government lower the safeguard mechanism baseline for liquefied natural gas production to incentivise the installation of carbon capture and storage facilities in all these LNG plants. And Paul Burke, that was one of his final case studies of how effectively a carbon price would encourage all these LNG plants to investigate and hopefully be able to install carbon capture and storage facilities in their plants. So objections. So if we go to a coalition MP, what might their response to this request be? So one expected response is, our LNG reduces emissions in Asia by replacing the burning of coal. And there's arguments on that, but generally it's probably true. So what the suggested approach is, rather than argue, we go agree that is true, but that does not excuse Australia from reducing our own emissions. So helping someone else reduce emissions doesn't excuse our emissions. It doesn't help us with our Paris targets. So we are a climate laggard if we don't tackle our most significant emission issues. So they might also say, a coalition MP might also say, we need to wait till the research and development on this carbon capture and storage is complete. And but the suggested response to that, we are a climate laggard if we don't tackle our most significant emission issues now. So again, an ask for an MP that any MP could do, there's nothing stopping an MP from writing a letter to the Prime Minister. Okay, so that covers those three issues, and I'll hand over now so we can look at another breakout session.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. That was amazing. So much information there. And again, we'll be trying to get all this information sent out to everybody just in case you want to review it at a later time. But again, well done. That was very, very informative.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our CCL channel by hitting the button in the top left-hand corner of this screen. Spread the word of CCL by using the share icon to as many of your contacts as possible. Thank you. See you next video.